We're not trying to erase anything. We just need. I have everything I need in there, I interrupted gently. Everything except boundaries. My son served me an eviction notice in my own living room. He didn't use papers. He used words. You don't pay rent, he said. You don't live here. He said it like he was stating the weather. Not to his mother. To a stranger. I stood in the doorway of my own house, my hand on the frame, holding on. The evening light fell on the carpet I bought 20 years ago, but I felt like a trespasser, like I was sneaking into a home I built with my own hands. My chest tightened, not from fear, from something older, something that had been sleeping inside me for years. Dignity. Maybe it dies slowly, or maybe like tonight, it wakes up all at once. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in Australia, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. My name is Evelyn Jarrett. I'm 74 years old. This is my house on Pinecrest Drive in Bristol, Connecticut. I am a retired nurse. I raised my son, Matthew, in this house. I buried my husband, George, in this yard. And now, my son was telling me I didn't belong here. He didn't even look at me when he said it. He was scrolling on his phone, tapping his thumb. His wife, Claire, sat at the kitchen counter. She stirred her herbal tea. She had a little smile, a smile that said, finally, a smile that made me stand up straight, even at 74. I don't pay rent, I repeated. The words tasted sour. Matthew, this is my home. He sighed, a tired, impatient sigh, like I was a child not understanding a simple rule. Mom, please. We've talked about this. You don't contribute. We cover groceries, bills, the kids' school, everything. And you just live here. Just live here. As if breathing under my own roof was a privilege they gave me. I felt my fingers tremble. So I folded them together. I hid it. Calm. That was always my strength. 40 years of nursing taught me to keep my voice steady while the world fell apart. Tonight was no different. I see, I said. Only 2 words. They felt heavy. Claire glanced at Matthew, then at me. She was checking if I understood my new role. The guest, the burden, the old woman who should be grateful for whatever corner they allowed her. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I turned. I walked down the hallway. I passed the family photos. Photos I had dusted that morning. His small kindergarten face. His gap-toothed grin at 8. The awkward teenager who hugged me so hard once I couldn't breathe. For a moment, those pictures blurred. Not from old eyes. From something more bitter. In my room, I closed the door gently. Not because I was afraid of disturbing them, but because I finally needed the silence. My knees ached as I sat on the bed. I smoothed the quilt I sewed when my hands were steadier. I was not surprised by the insult. No, I was surprised by the clarity. It was like someone opened a window in a room I'd been sleeping in for too long. He thought this house was his. He thought I was here by their grace. Sitting there in the dim light, I understood, not with anger, with a quiet, cold certainty. Something in my life had shifted. A thought came, not a whisper, a firm, steady voice inside me. This is not their home. This was never their home. And I am done being invisible in it. I folded my hands in my lap. I exhaled. The next steps were already taking shape in my mind. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. I lay there listening. The refrigerator hummed. The pipes settled. The branches of the big oak tree brushed against the siding. They had done that for decades. But the sounds felt different now, like they belonged to a place that no longer recognized me. Strange. So strange. How quickly a home can turn into just walls. Matthew and Claire moved in 6 years ago. It was supposed to be for a few months. Matthew lost his job. The kids were small. They were struggling. I remember him on my porch. Shoulders slumped. Voice trembling. He was embarrassed. And me? I was foolish. Soft-hearted. I opened my arms and my door. Stay as long as you need. I told him. That's what mothers say. That's what I believed. At first, they were grateful. Claire brought cheap carnations from the supermarket. Matthew fixed the broken railing. The kids hugged me every morning. For a while, it felt like healing. Having a family bustle through the rooms George and I built. But gratitude has an expiration date. I learned that by the end of the first year, they weren't asking to use the living room. They just used it. My kitchen became their kitchen. My quiet evenings became theirs to interrupt. My bedroom door, they only knocked when they needed something. Mom, can you watch the kids? Mom, do you have $20? Mom, we'll be late. Don't wait up. Always Mom. Never, thank you. And then the language changed. They stopped saying, we're staying with you. They started saying, the house. Then, our house. I saw it in little things. The day Claire rearranged my pantry. It just makes more sense this way, she said. The afternoon, Matthew carried my old sewing machine to the garage. It takes up too much space, he said. He promised to bring it back. He never did. And I let it happen. One small thing at a time. That's how erosion works. Not in earthquakes. In the slow crumbling of pieces you barely notice losing. By the third year, they hosted barbecues without asking me. Neighbors waved at them, not me. Children I didn't know ran across the lawn George planted by hand. They ruined my roses twice. Claire shrugged. They're just plants, she said. They're not just plants, I wanted to say. But I swallowed the words. I'd been swallowing words for years. Because I remembered Matthew as a boy. A soft-hearted boy. I remembered him crying at 10. I remembered the terrified 18-year-old who called me from college. And in every argument, every slight, every moment of disrespect, I told myself, he's still that boy somewhere. Be patient. Be understanding. But patience has a cost. And understanding becomes something ugly. It becomes ugly when you give it to people who no longer see your value. Last year, they took the master bedroom. They didn't ask. They took it. They said it was better for the kids to be near their bathroom. They moved me to the smaller room at the end of the hall. I let it happen. Matthew was stressed. Claire was overwhelmed. The children needed stability. But what about me? When did I stop being someone they worried about? Some nights, I heard them whisper. They whispered about finances, about jobs, about vacations they wanted to take. Vacations I knew I would never be invited on. And each time, I reminded myself, this is temporary. Once they get on their feet, things will go back to normal. But temporary is a sly word. It gives people time to settle into entitlement. And last night, when Matthew told me I didn't pay rent in the house I owned outright, I realized something painful, something simple. They had rewritten the story in their minds. They weren't guests anymore. I was. And somewhere deep in my chest, under all the years of silence, something finally stirred. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was the first spark of a boundary being born. The next morning, I moved through the house like I was in a museum of someone else's memories. I was careful, quiet. The air felt heavy, tense, like the pause before a storm. Nobody spoke to me at breakfast. Not Matthew, not Claire, not even the kids. They whispered among themselves while I made my tea. They whispered, but not softly enough. She turned the heat off again last night. Claire muttered. I didn't touch the thermostat, I said calmly. She didn't answer. She just rolled her eyes. Like I was a child caught lying. Funny. I survived double shifts in emergency rooms. I raised a son alone. I paid off a mortgage with my own hands. Yet here I was, accused of sabotaging the heating in a house that bore my name on every document. But that was the pattern. Small accusations, tiny frictions, all pointing in the same direction. You're in our way. Later, I heard them in the living room. The walls in this house carry sound, like old trees carry wind. Mom doesn't understand how much pressure we're under, Matthew said. She doesn't want to understand, Claire replied. She's set in her ways. Everything has to be like it was 40 years ago. A pause. Then, softer, she should be grateful we're here. Grateful for what? For being pushed aside. For hearing my life discussed, like I was a broken appliance. I stood in the hallway, invisible. For a moment, I imagined stepping into the room. I imagined saying something firm, something sharp. But the urge passed. At my age, dignity is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It waits. But then I saw the boxes. Dozens of them, stacked against the wall. Claire had labeled them neatly. Seasonal decor, kitchen, office, kids' books. I froze. When did they bring all this in? How did I miss it? This wasn't temporary anymore. They were settling. They were rooting. They were expanding. Matthew walked by and saw me staring. We're reorganizing, he said. The house needs better storage. The house. Not your house. Not Mom's house. Just the house. Like ownership was an inconvenience. And we were thinking, Claire added. Her tone was too careful. Maybe it's time we did something about the guest room. What about it? I asked. They exchanged a glance. Well, Claire said, it doesn't make sense for you to have 2 rooms. The bedroom and the sewing room. Not when we're so tight on space. Tight on space, I echoed. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped me. This is a 4-bedroom house. Yes, she said. Patient. So patient it grated. But families outgrow places. You know how it is. I knew exactly how it was. They wanted my sewing room. The one sanctuary I had left. The last space that felt like mine. The room Claire never entered. The room where George's workbench still stood. Where his old flannel shirt still hung on a chair. The room that smelled of cedar and thread and memories. No, I said. Simply. Claire blinked. Pardon? No, I repeated. That room stays as it is. Her face tightened. We're not trying to erase anything. We just need. I have everything I need in there, I interrupted gently. Everything except boundaries. Matthew stepped forward. He was bristling. Mom, don't make this difficult. But I wasn't making it difficult. I was just no longer making it easy. I walked away. I left their irritation hanging in the air like smoke. In the sewing room, I shut the door. I let the quiet wash over me. The afternoon sun fell across the wooden floor. It caught on loose buttons and bits of thread. My hands trembled, not with fear, with the weight of clarity. They didn't see this room as sacred. They didn't see the house as mine. They didn't see me at all. And for the first time, the thought from last night began to burn steadily. If they couldn't recognize the boundaries of my home, then I would draw boundaries they could not ignore. There's a particular silence that fills a house when resentment has lived there long enough. It isn't loud. It seeps into doorframes, into carpets, into the spaces between footsteps. That's the silence I woke up to the next morning. It was thick, stale, familiar in a way that made my chest ache. Matthew didn't speak to me before work. Claire offered a stiff nod. Her lips were pressed tight. Even the kids moved around me carefully, like an invisible boundary had appeared overnight. Maybe it had. I made my tea the same way I had for 50 years. But it tasted different. Bitter. Like something burned. It wasn't always like this. Memory has its own gravity, especially when the present wounds come from the same hands you once held with pride. Matthew wasn't always ashamed of me, but somewhere he began to hide parts of his upbringing. He hid them like people hide old scars. Quietly, subtly, until the people around him forgot they ever existed. The first time I knew something changed was 25 years ago. He came home from college for Thanksgiving. He was different, taller, confident, polished in a way that felt practiced. He brought a girl with him. Not Claire. Someone else. She had a laugh loud enough to fill the house. At dinner, she asked what I did for work. "I'm a nurse," I told her. Matthew shifted in his seat. "She used to be," he corrected quickly. "She's semi-retired now." I was working full-time then. I remember thinking, why change the truth? But the girl just nodded. She went on talking. Matthew didn't meet my eyes. That was the first stone in the distance between us. A distance that would stretch for decades. Then came Claire. Beautiful. Composed. Always dressed like she was going to a fundraiser. She never said anything cruel. Not outright. But her politeness was sharp. Sharp in ways only women notice. She'd look at my old oak dining table and say, "Vintage is so charming." She'd compliment my homemade curtains with, "I love how they feel, nostalgic." Nostalgic. A lovely word. In her mouth, it meant outdated. I could handle that. I had thick skin. Life gave it to me. But slowly, things shifted. Matthew stopped inviting me to his office parties. He stopped introducing me to his friends. He stopped saying where he grew up, unless someone asked. And if they asked, he'd say, "It's a small old neighborhood." Mom kept everything very traditional. Traditional. Another word with teeth. When George died, they were attentive. For a while. But grief fades for everyone except the one who carries it. After the funeral, after the casseroles, after the polite concerns, their life moved on. My life got heavier. When they had children, I hoped things would change. I dreamed of laughter in the yard, tiny hands tugging my apron, holidays filled with warmth again. But Claire set the tone early. "We don't want them picking up outdated habits," she said once. I was trying to teach my granddaughter how to knead dough. Outdated habits. As if I were passing on a disease. And Matthew, my own son, he nodded. Every nod widened the gap. Every silence was agreement. But the moment that carved itself into my memory, happened 3 years ago, at a fancy restaurant Claire loved. It was her birthday. I dressed as nicely as I could. A navy skirt, a soft blouse, my mother's pearls. I felt almost pretty. Someone at the table asked Matthew what his parents did. "Dad worked in construction," he said proudly. Then he hesitated. "And your mother?" the man asked. Matthew shifted. He cleared his throat. "She stayed home mostly." I nearly dropped my fork. Stayed home. I worked 39 years in a hospital. I held dying hands. I delivered babies. I saved lives. I paid bills. I buried a husband. I kept a home running. I raised a child alone. But in that moment, my son dismissed my entire life. He dismissed it with 4 words. I didn't confront him. I didn't make a scene. I swallowed the hurt, the way women of my generation do. Quietly, privately, but it lodged deep inside me. A splinter, waiting for the right moment to push back to the surface. And now, standing in my own kitchen, watching them move through my home like it was a stage built for them. That splinter throbbed. They weren't just disrespectful. They weren't just entitled. They were rewriting history. His and mine. And last night's words. You don't pay rent. Those words finally woke something up. Something that had lain dormant too long. He had no idea what he unlocked. He had no idea the ground under his feet was already shifting. By the end of that week, the house no longer felt like a place a woman could breathe in. Not even an old woman who needs so little. A warm chair, a quiet cup of tea, a corner left untouched. Even those small mercies were shrinking. They were being overtaken by someone else's plans, someone else's voice, someone else's certainty that they belonged here more than I did. The moment I finally understood how far things had gone, it was a Thursday evening. I was mending a tear in one of the kids' jackets. Claire always forgot to do it. She'd say, "Crafts are your department, Evelyn." I didn't mind. Busy hands steady the mind. Claire came in first. No greeting. She went to the counter. She poured sparkling water. She sighed loudly, theatrically, the way women do when they want to be asked what's wrong. I didn't ask. Matthew followed, keys jangling, jacket half on. He looked tense. They exchanged a glance that passed like a secret note between students. I paused my stitching. I felt the air thicken. "Mom," Matthew began. He rubbed the back of his neck. "We were talking about something earlier." Always the same opening. "We were talking. We've decided. We think." Never, "What do you think, Mom?" Never that. Claire set her glass down too hard. The clink sounded like a warning. "We need to make better use of the space," she said. "The kids are growing. Matthew works from home sometimes. The house just isn't accommodating the way we need." I set the needle down, slowly. "What space are you talking about now?" Matthew exhaled. "Your room." "My room." "I mean," he corrected quickly, "the room you're in now, the smaller one. We were thinking we want to turn your bedroom into a shared office and storage for the kids' things. And you could move into the sewing room permanently. It's easier for you anyway. Fewer stairs. Closer to the bathroom. Closer to the bathroom." How thoughtful. Nothing says respect like rewriting your mother's living arrangements under the guise of convenience. I studied their faces. Claire's eyes were bright, not with excitement, with triumph. Matthew looked guilty. But not guilty enough. Never enough to stop him. "And where would I put my things?" I asked. Claire waved her hand. "You don't have many belongings. We can help you declutter. Honestly, Evelyn, it's time." Time. Time for what? Time to disappear into a corner? Time to fade out of the way? "The children need space," she kept going. "Matthew needs a workspace. And the house." "The house," I said quietly, "is mine." They both stiffened. Claire blinked, like I had spoken out of turn. Matthew swallowed. "Mom, we know that. But—" "No," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. "I don't think you do." Silence swallowed the kitchen. A new silence. Not the resentful kind. A silence shaped like a boundary. A boundary finally rising from the ground. Claire recovered first. "We're not trying to take anything from you. But families adjust. You can't keep everything the same just because you're sentimental." Sentimental. Another word. Another word that meant unreasonable old woman. My hands didn't shake this time. I picked up the jacket. I folded it with deliberate care. "When George and I built this house," I said softly, "we did it room by room, paycheck by paycheck. We painted these walls ourselves. We laid this flooring piece by piece. Every decision in this house was ours." I looked at Matthew. "You've never built a home. You've only moved into them." He reeled. Anger crept into his face. But he said nothing. Claire crossed her arms. Well, maybe it's time this home evolved into something that works for everyone. Everyone but me, I replied. She didn't deny it. That was the moment. The moment I felt myself step outside the role. The role of the quiet mother. The role of the convenient grandmother. The role of the woman who could be shifted like furniture. No, I said again. This time, the word felt heavier. Solid. My room stays where it is. And so do I. Matthew looked stunned. Claire looked offended. But I didn't wait for their arguments. I stood. I pushed in my chair. I walked to the hallway. My knees hurt. My back ached. But my dignity, that old, patient thing, it stood tall. Behind me, Claire hissed. This is ridiculous. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Because walking down that hallway, I understood something clearly at last. They weren't just pushing me out of my space. They were pushing me toward a decision. A decision I had avoided for too long. A decision that would change everything. The weekend came with a heaviness in the air. The kind you feel before a thunderstorm. People pretend storms arrive suddenly. But older women know better. Storms announce themselves. They announce themselves in tightening voices, in slammed drawers, in the way footsteps grow sharper on hardwood floors. That Saturday morning, I heard them arguing, not whispering this time. Their voices carried through the vents. The house itself wanted me to hear. She's being unreasonable, Claire snapped. She's my mother, Matthew said, but he said it without conviction. And we're your family too, Claire shot back. We can't live like this. It's cramped. It's chaotic. She gets upset over everything. A pause. Then the knife. We need the space, Matt. We need it. Funny. That word, we. How often it excluded me. I sat on the edge of my bed. My robe folded on my lap. I listened to them try to solve the problem of me. As if I were a leaky faucet. A stubborn stain. Then Matthew said something. Something that made my spine stiffen. She doesn't contribute, he said. His voice was flat. Not financially. Not with the upkeep. What does she think this is? I almost laughed. A bitter little chuckle rose in my throat. I forced it down. I had contributed enough in my lifetime to build 2 families. Not one. Some contributions don't show up on bank statements. Still, the word stung. Not because they were cruel, because he believed them. A few minutes later, Claire marched into my sewing room. She didn't knock. Of course she didn't. We need to talk, she announced. I kept my back turned. I was gathering spools of thread into a wooden box. I let her stand there. I let her stand in her impatience. Evelyn, she said sharply, this can't continue. What exactly can't continue, Claire? I asked. I turned slowly. She took a breath. She clasped her hands, like she was rehearsing sympathy. The way you manage things around here. Bills are going up. Groceries are expensive. The kids need new clothes every few months. Matthew and I are doing everything. We're drowning. You're not drowning, I said gently. You're overspending. Her eyes widened. Indignation flashed. Excuse me? You buy organic snacks the children don't like, I said. My voice stayed calm. You order new home decor every week. You drive 40 minutes to a salon that overcharges you. Because you hate budget places. Claire, you're not drowning. You're swimming in a current you created. She flushed. Her lips tightened. Well, excuse me for trying to maintain a normal lifestyle. Normal. Another lovely word with a sting. And don't take that tone with me, she added. We're supporting you. Supporting me? The phrase settled in the room like smoke. I looked around. I looked at the shelves George built. The old lamp with the dented shade. The quilt in the corner. Everything spoke of a life built long before Claire was born. Supporting me, I repeated softly, "Claire, this house is paid off. I handled every bill here for 30 years. Property taxes, insurance, repairs. All of it. You're not supporting me. You're residing here." She let out a strained laugh. "We pay for everything now, Evelyn. You don't lift a finger toward household expenses." "Because," I said, "you moved in. I didn't invite you to split bills. I offered you shelter. There's a difference." Claire's voice sharpened. "Well, maybe things would feel more equal if you contributed financially." "Contribute?" I asked. "To a house that is legally mine?" Her cheeks reddened. "This isn't about paperwork. It's about fairness." "Ah, yes. Fairness. A word people always use when they want what isn't theirs." Matthew appeared behind her. He looked uneasy, like he sensed something had shifted too far. "Mom," he started, "Claire's right. We need help." "And how much help?" I asked calmly. "Have you calculated I owe you?" He blinked. "What?" "You said I don't contribute. I'd like to understand the math." Matthew rubbed his temples. "Mom, please don't make this adversarial." "I'm not," I said, stepping toward them. "But I do want the truth." Claire crossed her arms. "It would make things easier if you paid rent. Just a symbolic amount. To show appreciation." "Appreciation," I said. "Appreciation for being allowed to live in the home I own." I looked at her. "How much?" Claire hesitated. Then she said it. "Something fair. Maybe 1,200. 1,200. I repeated. "Per month?" "Yes." A silence stretched between us. It was thick, charged. Matthew looked at the floor. Claire looked triumphant. I looked at the doorway, the place where George used to lean after work, smelling like sawdust and cold air. "I see," I said finally. Those two words again. Simple, bare. But they carried a weight neither of them recognized. Then I added quietly, "Thank you for clarifying where we stand." Before they could respond, I walked past them. I didn't hurry. I didn't shake. I moved with a certainty they had not seen in years. Because now I understood. This wasn't care. This wasn't family. This was a transaction they had rewritten in their heads. And if they wanted to talk money, then money and documents were exactly where I would go next. By Monday, the tension had settled into something almost physical. It clung to the walls like humidity. It made every breath feel heavier. Claire moved with clipped footsteps. Matthew avoided my eyes. The children tiptoed. They sensed something the grown-ups refused to name. But I had named it. And once a truth has a name, it can no longer be buried. That afternoon, I overheard them again. Not on purpose, but because voices carry differently in a house someone is trying to take over. They were in the living room. The living room I furnished with my own hands. Years before either of them existed. Claire's voice was sharp, controlled. "We have to decide. We can't keep living like this. The house is wasted on her. Wasted on me." Matthew sighed. "She's not going to just agree to move out." "She will," Claire insisted. "She's old. People her age don't fight these things. And if she does, well, we'll handle it. Handle it as if I were a legal issue, not a person." I stepped back into the hallway before they could see me. My heart wasn't racing. Instead, something quieter settled inside me. The same quiet I used to feel before delivering difficult news to a patient. A professional, steady quiet. Later that evening, I found a stack of papers on the kitchen counter. They were left carelessly. Insurance documents, school papers, and a folder labeled future home plans. Curiosity didn't drive me. Instinct did. I opened it. Inside were printed floor plans. Floor plans of my house. But they were rearranged, remodeled. Walls were removed. Bedrooms were converted. Sections were highlighted. Notes were scribbled in Claire's looping handwriting. Knock down this wall for an open layout. Turn Evelyn's sewing room into nursery. Use her bedroom for dual office. Storage from her closets. Her closets. My closets. My rooms. My home. It wasn't remodeling. It was an erasure. And then the real blow. At the bottom of the stack, a printed article. The title screamed up at me. How to Talk to Aging Parents About Assisted Living. It was highlighted, annotated. So that was their plan. Not just to push me aside, but to push me out. Entirely. I closed the folder carefully. I set it back exactly as I'd found it. I walked to the window. Outside, dusk settled over the yard. George's oak tree stood tall, silhouetted against the fading sky. He planted it the year Matthew was born. Each ring inside, its trunk, held a piece of our life. I placed my hand on the windowsill. The old wood was smooth under my palm. I whispered, not from weakness, but because truth sounds stronger when spoken softly. They think this house is theirs. I took a breath. They have no idea. Because in that moment, something clicked into place. It clicked with the finality of a locked door. This wasn't about bedrooms. It wasn't about storage. It wasn't even about bills or respect anymore. This was about ownership. Ownership of my home, my history, my remaining years. They had redrawn their version of the story. Now it was my turn to draw lines. Lines they would not cross. I walked back to my sewing room. I closed the door behind me. I sat at George's old workbench. My knees ached. My fingers weren't as nimble as they once were, but my mind was steadier than ever. There, under the soft lamplight, I opened the drawer where I kept all my important documents, the ones no one else bothered to ask about, the deed, the will, the property tax records, every proof of ownership, neatly arranged, everything bearing one name, mine. They thought I wouldn't fight. They assumed old age meant surrender. But they forgot something essential. A woman who has lived a long life knows exactly what she can lose. And she knows exactly what she refuses to give up. The next morning began quietly, the kind of quiet that feels rehearsed. Matthew and Claire moved around the kitchen with exaggerated politeness. Their voices were soft. Their footsteps were light, as if I were a fragile object, an object that might crack if addressed to directly. I'd seen this behavior before, in hospital corridors, the hush that comes before delivering bad news. Except this time, I wasn't receiving the bad news. I was preparing it. I sat at the table with my tea. I watched them dance around their unspoken plans. Claire avoided eye contact. Matthew cleared his throat twice, a habit he never outgrew. It usually meant he needed something from me. Mom, he finally said, we've been thinking about long-term arrangements. I stirred my tea once, slowly. Is that so? Claire stepped in. Her tone dripped with a sweetness that didn't mask the sour underneath. We just want you to be comfortable. You know, in a place that's more suited to someone your age. My age. A weapon disguised as concern. I looked at her. Really looked. Claire, I said, you mean assisted living? She blinked. She was startled. Startled, I wasn't playing along with the script. Well, yes, it would be best. Best for everyone. You'd have help, support, activities, and we'd finally have room to what? I asked. Spread out? Redecorate? Take over? Matthew flinched, like I'd slapped him. Mom, he said defensively, You're twisting things. We just want what's fair. Fair. It was always that word. It's unrealistic, he continued, for you to stay here forever. The house is big. The upkeep is a lot. And you don't exactly contribute. I finished for him. He shut his mouth. I let the silence stretch. I let it grow thick and heavy. Then I stood up slowly. My knees have their own stubbornness. I placed my cup in the sink. There will be no assisted living, I said. Not now. Not later. Claire's mask slipped. Evelyn, you don't get to make that decision alone. That was the moment. The moment I felt something inside me harden. Not cruelty. Not anger. Something cleaner. Like a line drawn neatly across a page. Actually, I said, turning back to them. I do. Matthew's face reddened. Mom, you can't expect us to live like this. We need to plan ahead. You can't just. I already have, I said. He blinked. What? But before he could press further, the doorbell rang. A sharp, firm chime. It did not belong to friends. It did not belong to neighbors. Claire's eyebrows shot up. Who's that? I didn't answer. Instead, I walked to the foyer. My steps were slow, but they were sure. I opened the door. Cool morning air slipped in, along with a familiar figure. Mr. Sullivan, my attorney for the last 15 years. He gave me a respectful nod. Good morning, Mrs. Jarrett. I have the documents you requested. Behind me, I heard Claire's breath catch. I heard Matthew's footsteps. They approached fast. What documents? Matthew demanded. Mr. Sullivan looked past me. His expression was unreadable. Property confirmation, updated deed copies, and the notice you asked me to prepare. The house felt suddenly smaller. It shrank around the weight of those words. Matthew sputtered. Mom, what notice? I met his eyes. My son's eyes. The same shade of brown he had at 5 years old. The same eyes that used to look up at me, trusting. But this wasn't that boy. And I wasn't that mother anymore. A notice to vacate, I said quietly. Claire staggered back, like the words had physical force. Vacate? You're evicting us. I'm asking you, I corrected, to find your own home. The one you keep planning renovations for. The one you believe you deserve. Matthew looked stunned, almost childlike. You can't do that. This house, I said, is mine. It always has been. And you stopped treating it, and me, with respect a long time ago. Silence fell, sharp as broken glass. Behind me, Mr. Sullivan waited. Professional. Steady. In front of me stood the two people who had spent years convincing themselves the roof over their heads belonged to them. And between us, finally, stood the truth, a truth they could no longer rearrange like furniture. After Mr. Sullivan left, the house fell into a stunned quiet. Not the quiet of peace. No, this quiet had edges. It scraped at the walls. It hovered above the stairs. It followed my footsteps like a shadow that wasn't mine. Matthew and Claire shut themselves in their bedroom. I heard their voices rise and fall, urgent, panicked, the tones of people who finally realize something. They realize a door they thought stood wide open is locked from the inside. By me. I walked into my sewing room. I closed the door, gently. For a long moment, I just stood there. I let the familiar smells settle into my lungs. Cedar, old fabric. I ran my fingers along George's workbench. I traced the nicks he left in the wood long ago. Funny how a man's presence can linger in the smallest imperfections. I sat down slowly. My knees complained, but today their ache felt like a reminder. A reminder that I had carried the weight of this family long enough. That strength sometimes hides and bones that creak. I pulled out a small wooden box from the bottom drawer. Inside were photographs. Photographs I hadn't touched in years. Not because they hurt, because they carried too much truth. Truth I hadn't wanted to look at. Truth I had tucked away like an unpaid bill. There was Matthew at age 8, arms wrapped around George's leg, smiling so wide his eyes disappeared. George had just built him a treehouse. A crooked little thing. Matthew adored it, because Dad made it with his hands. Then another picture. Matthew at 18, standing tall, but still close enough to me that our shoulders touched. I remembered that day. His college acceptance letter had arrived. He told me he'd make us proud. Somewhere between those photographs and the man shouting about fairness, something had gone wrong. Something had gone terribly, quietly wrong. I held the pictures until my eyes blurred. Then I set them down gently. I wiped my palms on my skirt. I breathed out the truth I had carried for years. He began drifting long before he moved into this house. And I kept pretending he hadn't. Losing George carved a hole in Matthew, too. They were close, closer than most. When George died, Matthew lost his anchor, and I lost the man who understood both of us. The two of us floated separately after that, each pretending we weren't drowning. Maybe that's where the distance began. Maybe that's when he started seeking validation elsewhere, in people who valued polished surfaces more than roots. But even knowing that, even acknowledging the pain, it didn't soften what he'd done. Pain can explain behavior, but it can't excuse betrayal. A soft knock sounded at the door. "Mom." Matthew's voice. Small, unsure, almost boyish. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer immediately. I needed a moment. Not because I feared confrontation. Because I wanted to face him with clarity, not with old wounds. He opened the door, slightly. His face looked older. Or maybe it was just stripped of entitlement. Stripped for the first time in years. "Mom," he repeated, stepping inside. "You blindsided us." "Did I?" I asked quietly. "Or did you misunderstand silence for permission?" He swallowed hard. "We thought we assumed." "Yes," I said. "You assumed, and kept assuming." He sat on the low stool near the window. The same stool he used as a child. The stool he sat on while George taught him to sand wood. His voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell us you were unhappy?" I looked at him. This grown man. This man who still believed mothers exist only for their children's comfort. "Because every time I open my mouth," I said softly, "you rearranged the story. You rearranged it so it wouldn't inconvenience you." He flinched. "Mom," he whispered, "are you really going through with this? The notice? The eviction? Claire, she's devastated." "Claire," I repeated, "is devastated because she learned something. She learned the house she had already designed in her mind was never hers." He didn't deny it. "Matthew," I continued, "you stopped being guests. You became occupiers. And when people occupy what they do not own long enough, they forget. They forget whose labor built it." He covered his face with his hands. "Give us time," he said finally. "Please." I did. I answered. 6 years of time. He looked up at me. Then he really looked. And for a moment, I saw the child. The boy who trusted me. The boy I raised alone. But tenderness is not the same as surrender. "You have 30 days, I said gently. "If you need help finding a rental, I'll help you. But you will move." He nodded slowly, resigned. Then, quietly, he said, "I didn't know you had this in you." I exhaled, tired and steady. "You never looked closely enough." The following morning, a strange calm settled over me. Not the calm of peace. The kind that comes after a decision that has rooted itself so deeply that doubt can no longer reach it. I moved through the house slowly. I touched the banister George varnished. I opened curtains I had sewn decades ago. I let in a pale wash of winter light. This was my home. And for the first time in years, the house seemed to remember it, too. After breakfast, I called Mr. Sullivan. My voice didn't tremble once. "Mrs. Jarrett," he said, "the deed is clear. Sole ownership. No claims from your son. No cosigners. No transfers. You're protected. Protected. A word that should have comforted me. But instead, it left a faint ache. I hadn't realized how long I'd been unprotected. Unprotected inside my own walls. "We'll finalize the notice," he continued. "We'll send the formal letter today." "Good," I replied. "I want it done properly." Once I hung up, I sat at the dining table. I reviewed the folder he'd left. The title, the tax records, the old copy of the will George, and I rewrote after Matthew graduated. Everything was in my name. Every page was a reminder of years of sweat, sacrifice, steady, unglamorous work. Claire passed through the room. Her steps faltered when she saw the papers spread across the table. "You're really serious about this?" she said. Her voice was tight. I looked up at her. "Yes." She let out a humorless laugh. "You're choosing paperwork over your family." "I'm choosing respect," I said. "If family cannot give it, then paper must." Her jaw clenched, but she didn't argue further. She was learning slowly that I was no longer the easy opponent, not the opponent she'd grown accustomed to. A few minutes later, Matthew entered. His hair was rumpled. His shoulders were slumped. He looked like a man waking from a dream that had been pleasant only for him. "Mom," he said quietly, "I talked to Claire. We're still taking this in." "I understand," I replied, "but understanding doesn't change the timeline." He nodded, defeated. "I know." For the first time, I saw something fragile flicker across his face. Not just fear of losing the house. The dawning realization. The realization of what he had done. Of how far he had drifted. Of how little space he had left in his own mother's life. He had taken so much of hers. "We'll start looking for a place," he said. "But it'll take time." "You have 30 days, I repeated gently. "If you need help organizing, I will help. But the move will happen." He nodded again, slower this time. As he walked away, I felt a bittersweet tug in my chest. Not regret, not guilt, something quieter. The mourning of what could have been. What could have been if love had been treated with care, instead of convenience. Later, I stepped onto the porch. The air was cold. It nipped at my cheeks. George's oak tree rustled overhead. Its branches were bare, but they were strong. I rested my hand against its trunk. "I'm doing what we should have done sooner," I whispered to him. A breeze swept through the yard. Gentle, approving. Inside, I heard boxes being pulled from closets. I heard quiet murmuring, the beginning of departure. For the first time in many years, the house didn't feel crowded. It felt like it was beginning to breathe again. And so was I. The formal notice went out on a Tuesday. A plain envelope, cream-colored, unassuming, almost delicate. Delicate, considering the weight of what it carried. I placed it carefully on the hallway table. The table where Matthew and Claire couldn't miss it. No dramatics. No ceremony. Just truth. Truth written in legal language. The kind of language that doesn't tremble. The kind that doesn't hesitate. When Matthew found it, he didn't speak at first. He just stared. His shoulders rose and fell. Shallow, uneven breaths. Claire hovered behind him. Her lips were pressed tight. Her eyes were sharp. sharp with something between outrage and fear. 30 days, she read aloud. Her voice cracked. This is insane. Matthew looked at me. There was something raw in his eyes. Not anger this time. Disbelief. Disbelief that I had truly crossed a line. A line he never thought I'd approach. Mom, he whispered, how can you do this? I folded the dish towel I'd been holding. I set it on the counter. The same way you could talk about removing me from my own home, I said softly. The same way you discussed assisted living behind a closed door. He winced. I'm your son, he said. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Of course it does, I replied. But being someone's mother doesn't mean surrendering the rest of my life. It doesn't mean surrendering to their convenience. Claire stepped forward. We apologized. We said we'd fix things. Why isn't that enough? I studied her face. The desperation there wasn't about losing me. It was about losing the comfort, the security, the lifestyle she had built on a foundation that was never hers. You didn't apologize, I said. You panicked. You apologized that I reacted. Not for what you did. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand to stop him. My voice stayed calm, steady, the voice of a woman who has spent a lifetime soothing others while carrying her own storms. You treated me like an obstacle, I said. You tried to make decisions about my home, my rooms, my future. You planned renovations. You took over spaces. You spoke about me as though I were already halfway gone. Matthew looked down at the letter. His fingers tightened around the page. I didn't realize, he murmured. I didn't realize things had gone that far. They had, I said. And you didn't see it because you didn't want to. Claire exhaled sharply. She paced. So what? We're just supposed to pack up our lives and leave, just like that. Just like that, I echoed quietly. Yes. She stopped pacing. You're being selfish, Evelyn. I let the words sit in the air. They didn't sting. They didn't even touch me. For once, I said, I'm choosing myself. If that looks like selfishness to you, then you never knew me at all. A muscle in Matthew's cheek twitched. He looked around the house. The walls he took for granted. The floors he walked as if they belonged to him. His voice dropped to something almost fragile. Where are we supposed to go? There are dozens of places to rent in town, I told him. I will help you look. But this house is no longer yours to shape. A long silence followed. Not angry, not defiant, just hollow. The sound of something collapsing gently inside him. I thought you'd always need me, he whispered. I shook my head. I will always love you. But needing you? I smiled. A sad, tired smile. That was never the agreement. He nodded slowly, as if each movement weighed him down. And for the first time in years, Matthew truly saw me, not as someone to lean on, not as an extension of his life, not even as an obstacle. He saw me as a woman with her own will, a woman capable of asking for her worth, a woman capable of enforcing it. His voice broke. Well, we'll start packing. The days that followed were strangely quiet, not the hostile quiet from before, a subdued, exhausted quiet, a quiet of people packing up a dream they should never have claimed. Boxes appeared in the hallway, half filled, half forgotten. Drawers hung open. The house felt like it was slowly exhaling the weight it had been holding for years. Matthew carried most of the boxes himself. His shoulders were slumped, as though each cardboard flap reminded him of something he'd taken for granted. Claire moved briskly, but even her sharpness had dulled. Her steps were quicker, her annoyance more transparent, not the triumphant irritation she used to wear. the startled kind, like someone who'd miscalculated. Miscalculated a very important equation. They spoke less. And when they did, their voices stayed low. On the fourth evening, Matthew knocked on my door. He didn't barge in. He didn't hover. He knocked. The way a man does when he remembers. When he remembers he is entering someone else's space. "Come in," I said. He stepped inside. He was holding a small box. "These are yours," he murmured. He set it gently on my dresser. I opened it. Inside were small things. Buttons. Pins. A pair of shears I thought I'd lost. And one of George's old pocket knives. Items that had drifted into the general tide of their belongings. Swallowed up by clutter and carelessness. Now returned. Returned like overdue apologies. "Claire found them in our closet," he said. I nodded. I ran my thumb across the worn handle of the pocket knife. "Mom," he continued. He seated himself awkwardly on the chair. "I want you to know, I never meant to hurt you." "People rarely mean to," I said. "Intent doesn't erase impact." Still, I let him speak. "I guess," he hesitated. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I got used to things being easy here. You kept the house warm. The kids loved having you around. Claire liked the space. You liked the security." I corrected softly. "Not me." He didn't argue. A long silence followed. He stared at the carpet, as though searching for some version of himself. A version he still recognized. When he finally lifted his gaze, he looked older. Not in years. In humility. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. "About how you felt." "I did," I said. "Just not in words you wanted to hear. You mistook my patience for agreement. You mistook my silence for permission." His eyes glistened. "I don't know how to fix this." "You don't fix it," I said gently. "You learn from it." He bowed his head, as if receiving a truth he wasn't ready for. Claire approached the doorway. She hovered. Her arms were crossed. But this time, there was no sharpness in her posture. No triumph. No disdain. Only a rigid, uncomfortable vulnerability. "Evelyn," she said, "I took some of your books by accident. I put them on your bed." I nodded. "Thank you." She hesitated. Then she added, "And I'm trying. I know it doesn't look like it, but I am trying to accept consequences, trying to let go of a house she'd already redesigned in her mind, trying to understand a woman she had underestimated." I didn't ask for more. Instead, I said, "Effort matters. Even this late." That seemed to catch her off guard. She blinked. Then she stepped back into the hall, unsure what to do, with gentleness. After she left, Matthew spoke again. "We found a rental," he said. "Small place. Closer to the kids' school. We'll sign the lease tomorrow." I breathed in slowly, not out of relief, though there was some, because the shift felt enormous, like a tectonic plate finally settling into its rightful place. "That's good," I said. He nodded. "We'll be out of the house in 2 weeks. Sooner than the notice required. Later than the respect should have come." He stood. He wiped his palms on his jeans. He moved toward the door. But before stepping out, he turned back. "I know you won't say it," he murmured, "but I'm sorry." I didn't let him off the hook. I didn't give him a quick, "It's okay." Because it wasn't okay. Instead, I answered with something truer. "I'm glad you finally see it." He nodded again. Slow. Heavy. And then he left the room. For the first time in years, the house felt still. Not tense. Not crowded. Just still. A stillness that belonged to me again. Moving day crept closer. It crept the way winter does. Not suddenly. With a steady, undeniable presence. The house grew more bare with each passing hour. Shelves emptied. Closets breathed again. Corners revealed themselves. Corners that had been buried under toys and unused furniture. They revealed themselves like old friends. Old friends stepping back into the light. It was strange. Strange watching them pack. There was no shouting now. No arguments about fairness. No veiled critiques about my age. No critiques about my habits. Just the quiet rustle of cardboard. The thud of boxes closing. The kind of silence that follows a lesson. A lesson learned too late. On Thursday afternoon, Claire dropped a stack of folded blankets onto the couch. She stood there for a moment, arms crossed, staring at the living room wall. The wall where their family photos had hung. Only faint outlines remained. Squares of brighter paint. Paint where sunlight hadn't touched. She turned to me. "It looks empty," she said softly. "For now," I replied. She hesitated. "It won't feel strange for you, being here alone again?" "Strange isn't the worst thing," I said. "Disrespected is worse." That stopped her cold. She lowered her gaze. Her fingers tightened around the edge of a blanket. "I didn't mean for things to go that way," she murmured. "I know you didn't mean to," I answered. "But meaning nothing doesn't undo anything." For once, she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded. A small, stiff, but genuine nod. Later that evening, the children were in their room. The house was wrapped in a tired hush. Matthew approached me in the hallway. He held a box labeled Garage Tools, but he didn't set it down. He just stood there, shifting his weight, as if unsure how to begin. "Mom," he said, "Claire's struggling." "Moving is hard," I said. "It's not just that." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She feels like you're angry at her." I met his eyes. "Matthew, I'm not angry. I'm awake." He blinked, absorbing that. "I spent years shrinking." I continued. "I spent years shrinking so the two of you could spread out. Years biting my tongue. So you wouldn't feel criticized. So you wouldn't feel unwelcome. So you wouldn't feel judged." I paused. "But you judged me anyway." Matthew lowered the box to the floor. "We were wrong," he said. His voice was low. "I see that now." "Good," I answered. "Seeing is the first step. Changing is the second." He sank onto the bench by the staircase. His elbows were on his knees. For a long time, he didn't speak. The weight pressed down on him visibly. The weight of everything he hadn't noticed. The weight of the years. "I didn't know how far we'd drifted," he finally whispered. "You didn't look back often enough," I replied. A long silence settled between us. Not sharp this time. Softer. Almost reflective. He sighed. He rubbed his face with both hands. "Mom, can I ask something? Honestly." "Yes." "When we're gone, will you be okay?" I considered his question carefully. I had asked myself the same thing. Countless nights, staring at the ceiling, while the house groaned under the weight of other people's footsteps. "I'll be lonely sometimes," I admitted, "but loneliness is cleaner than disrespect." He nodded slowly, painfully. I could almost see the realization forming. The realization that the security he had grown used to was never owed to him, that I had given far more than he had ever thought to offer back. "I don't want this to be the last thing between us," he said quietly. "It won't be," I answered, "but it has to be the turning point." He looked up. His eyes were weary, but clearer than I had seen in years. "I'll try," he said. "I know," I replied, "and trying starts with leaving." He didn't flinch this time. He simply accepted it. He stood. He picked up the box. He carried it out to the car. Watching him walk away, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, just a slow, steady reclaiming. A reclaiming of space. Space inside the house. And space inside myself. The storm had come. And the storm had passed. And whatever came next, I would face it. I would face it with the dignity that had carried me through a lifetime. The morning they moved out was pale and cold, the kind of morning where breath hangs in the air. It hangs like unspoken words. I stood by the window. I watched Matthew load the last box into the car. Claire checked straps and buckles. Her movements were brisk, mechanical. The children sat in the back seat, bundled in coats. Their small faces were subdued. It made my heart twist, not with regret, with a tenderness age never quite loses. I had packed them lunches, not because I needed to, not to soften anything, but because it felt like a final act of decency. A final act in a story that had grown too tangled to hold much decency. When they came inside for a last sweep, their footsteps echoed differently, lighter, as though the house itself had already begun shedding their presence. Claire approached me first. She stopped a few feet away. Her hands were clasped so tightly, her knuckles were white. I expected bitterness. She was good at that. But when she finally spoke, her voice was surprisingly small. "Thank you," she said, "for letting us stay as long as we did." I nodded. "I hope you find a home," I said. "A home you can truly build together." For once, she didn't bristle. She simply swallowed. Then she turned away. She turned away before emotion could betray her face. Matthew lingered behind. He walked through the living room slowly. His fingers grazed the walls, the mantel, the worn arm of George's old chair. When he reached me, his shoulders sagged. They sagged under the weight of words he seemed afraid to offer. "I don't know how to say goodbye," he murmured. "You're not saying goodbye," I said gently. "You're saying, I understand." He closed his eyes briefly, as if memorizing the shape of the moment. Then he stepped forward, and he hugged me. Not a rushed gesture, not a half-hearted squeeze. A full, steady embrace, the kind he hadn't given me since he was a teenager. His breath trembled against my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he whispered again, but differently this time. Not a plea, a truth. "I know," I answered. When he finally pulled away, he looked older, humbled, softened, in a way that didn't erase the harm. But at least it acknowledged it. The children came next. They hugged me tightly, confused, quiet. I held them for a long time, long enough to feel their warmth seep into my bones. When they left my arms, something inside me loosened. Not breaking, just opening. At the doorway, Matthew paused. He looked back at me with a kind of reverence, perhaps for the first time. "We'll visit," he said softly. "You will," I replied, "when the time is right." He nodded. A sad little smile touched the corner of his mouth. Then he walked out. He closed the door gently behind him. The silence that followed was immense. I stood still for a long moment. I listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the soft creak of the settling floors, the distant sound of their car pulling away. The house didn't feel empty. It felt restored. I walked from room to room. I touched surfaces reclaimed after years of erosion. The air was clearer. The walls seemed taller. Light reached corners long buried beneath other people's belongings. When I reached the master bedroom, my bedroom again, I rested my hand on the door frame. I exhaled deeply, not with sadness, not with triumph, with relief. I opened the windows. A rush of crisp air came in. Curtains fluttered. Dust lifted. A house rediscovered its breath. So did I. I spent the rest of the afternoon putting things back where they belonged. My sewing machine returned to its rightful place. My books stacked neatly. George's flannel shirt folded on the chair, exactly where I liked it. By evening, the sun dipped low. It painted the floor in long, amber stripes. I made myself a cup of tea. Just one cup. Just for me. I sat in the silence. The silence that no longer hurt. For the first time in years, I felt not alone. I felt accompanied by something steadier than people. My own dignity. My own space. My own life. Unshared. Unshadowed. Wholly mine. The first night alone felt strange, but not frightening. It was as if the walls were waiting. Waiting for my voice again. The way one waits for an old friend. An old friend who finally comes home. I moved through the quiet rooms. I turned off lights. I touched familiar corners. I listened to the stillness settle into itself. There were no footsteps above me. No slammed doors. No hurried whispers. The silence was full, not hollow. I made myself a simple supper. Soup and half a sandwich. I ate it at the kitchen table, without rushing. No one picked apart my habits. No one questioned the brand of tea I preferred. The small freedoms of living alone are invisible. You don't see them until someone tries to take them away. When the dishes were washed, I stepped onto the back porch. The sky was a deep blue, the kind George used to call evening's first promise. The oak tree he planted stood strong, quiet, unwavering. I sat down in the rocking chair he built. Its joints creaked, but then again, so did mine. Age isn't a flaw, not when it has earned its place. I wrapped a shawl over my shoulders. I let the cool air settle around me. For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched. I didn't feel judged. I didn't feel like an object to be managed. I felt like myself, an older woman with a sharp mind, steady hands, a heart that had carried more than most. It occurred to me then, I wasn't just reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming the woman who had lived in it. Matthew called once that evening, a short message, polite, but unsure. I didn't answer. I let it ring, not out of bitterness, because healing has its own pace. And tonight wasn't a night for explanations. It was a night for rest. I brewed chamomile tea. I sat by the living room window. I watched the moon rise over the yard. Its soft light touched everything, the way kindness should, quietly, without taking anything in return. As I sipped my tea, I thought about the years I had spent shrinking myself, shrinking to make others comfortable, how I had allowed that slow erosion, believing patience was the same as love. But patience without respect is simply waiting, waiting for someone else to give you permission to exist. I finally understood. A life, just like a house, needs boundaries. It needs doors that close. It needs rooms that are off limits. It needs spaces where your own breath is the only breath you hear. When I finished my tea, I set the cup in the sink. I stood by the dining table. The notice copies were still there, neatly stacked, ready to be filed away. I placed them in a folder. I slid the folder into the cabinet. I closed the door with a gentle click. Not an ending, a closure, the kind that frees something inside you. Before bed, I walked through each room slowly. I touched nothing. I just appreciated the presence. My presence. It felt like returning to myself, returning after a long, unmarked absence. In the bedroom, I pulled back the covers. I smoothed the sheets. I lay down with a sigh that felt like truth. The house hummed softly around me. Not lonely, not empty, just mine. Weeks passed. The silence in the house became a companion, a gentle one. I planted flowers in the spring. I fixed the loose board on the porch steps. My hands were slower, but they remembered the work. Matthew called every Sunday. The conversations were short, careful, but they were conversations. He told me about the new rental. He told me about the kids' school. He did not ask about the house. Not anymore. One afternoon, I was in the backyard. I was weeding around George's oak tree. The sun was warm on my back. The doorbell rang. It was Matthew. He was alone. He stood on the porch holding a bakery box. "I brought pie," he said. "Apple. Your favorite." I let him in. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where so many hard words had been spoken. We ate pie on my old plates. For a while, we didn't talk. We just ate. Then he said, "The house looks good, Mom." "It feels good," I said. He nodded. He looked around. Really looked. "I'm starting to see it," he said quietly. "What we did. How we just took over. It's clearer from the outside. From not living here." "Distance helps," I said. "It doesn't excuse it," he said. "But it helps me see it." That was progress. Real progress. He helped me wash the dishes. He dried the pie plate carefully. Before he left, he stopped at the front door. He turned to me. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, Matthew." He hugged me. It was a real hug, not an apology hug. A goodbye hug. "I see you next time" hug. Then he left. I watched his car drive away. I didn't feel that old, familiar ache. I felt something like peace. A complicated peace. But peace nonetheless. Seasons turned. The oak tree bloomed green again. I hosted a small tea for women from my old nursing department. We laughed in the living room. The room that was once a battlefield. Now it was just a room. My room. Claire sent a Christmas card. A picture of the kids. She signed it, "From our family to yours." It was a step. A small, stiff step. But a step. One evening, I was in my sewing room. I was working on a quilt. A quilt for my granddaughter. The evening light was golden. It poured through the window. It lit up the dust motes dancing in the air. I stopped sewing. I just watched the light. I listened to the quiet hum of my house. I thought about George. I thought about the young couple who built this place. I thought about the mother who raised a son here. I thought about the nurse who came home tired. I thought about the widow who learned to live alone. And I thought about the woman who finally stood up. The woman who said, "This is mine." All those women were me. I had folded myself away for so long, to make room for others. But now there was room. Room for all of me. The phone rang. It was Matthew. The kids wanted to know if they could come over Saturday. They wanted to help plant tomatoes. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." We made plans. Simple plans. Grandmother and grandchildren plans. After I hung up, I went to the window. I looked out at George's oak tree. Its leaves rustled in the twilight breeze. It had seen it all. The building, the living, the leaving, the staying. It was still standing. So was I. Today is my 75th birthday. I didn't plan a party. I made myself a small cake. One layer. Chocolate. I put a single candle on top. I sat at the head of my dining table. I lit the candle. The flame was small and bright in the dim room. I thought about what to wish for. But I realized I didn't need a wish. Not today. I had my house. The walls that held my history. The floors that knew my footsteps. The windows that framed my world. I had my peace. The peace that comes from knowing your own worth. The peace that comes from drawing a line and defending it. I had my son. Not the son I dreamed he would be. Not the son who lived in my house. But the son who was learning. The son who was calling. The son who was trying. And I had myself. Evelyn Jarrett. Retired nurse. Widow. Mother. Grandmother. Homeowner. A woman of steady hands and a clear mind. I took a deep breath. I blew out the candle. Smoke curled up toward the ceiling. The house was quiet, but the quiet was kind. It was a quiet that said, asterisk, you are here. You are safe. You are home. Asterisk. I cut a slice of cake. I took a bite. It was sweet. It was enough. Later, I'll call Matthew. I'll thank him for the flowers he sent. I'll listen to my granddaughter tell me about her soccer game. I'll sit on the porch and watch the sunset paint the sky. This is my life. Not a dramatic life. Not a perfect life. But it is my life. Lived in my house. On my terms. If you take anything from my story, take this. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to draw lines. You are allowed to say no. Even if your voice trembles. Even if your hands shake. Even if everyone tells you to be quiet. Your story isn't over until you say it is. Mine is right here. In every room. In every board George nailed. In every stitch I sewed. In the quiet of the evening. In the strength of the oak tree. It is not a story of revenge. It is a story of return. A return to myself. And that is the best ending I could ever write. If this story resonated with you, please don't hesitate to like this video and subscribe to this channel so we can share more with each other. Please leave a comment and let me know where you're watching from.